This week on Writers, Inc.
So ever since then, people have been looking at story through a temporal lens, beginning, middle, end, first act, second act, third act. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that, except that I don't love it because it gives you the impression that a story is about a progression of events instead of a collision of desires. See, stories are more about collisions of desires than just events occurring. So you can have 3 events and have no story. If you have no struggle, you have no desire.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie on a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories, all have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out, school's in session. This is Writers, Inc.
Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
It's Jenna Brown.
Kevin Tumlinson.
And I am JD Barker. Welcome to Writers, Inc. So I am in awe of this guy that just left my house. I've nicknamed him Ken the Water Whisperer because we've had the house is pretty big, and we've got we put 2 roofs on it. Like we initially had to reshingle the whole roof because it had 6 different types of roofs on it when we bought it. Like they basically just put a new roof on like whenever they built an addition, and they didn't bother to redo the rest of the roofs. But like when we bought it, there was a hole in the ceiling where a skylight used to be. Like animals were coming in and out. The house was completely like abandoned at the time. So like we closed all that up. We put a new roof on it, and we still had leaks. But it's a huge roof, and it's got tons of peaks and valleys and all kinds of weirdness to it. And I've had roofer after roofer out here looking at it, and like one of them tore the shingles off and they replaced it with a metal roof, and another one tore part of that off, replaced it with a rubber roof. Like none of these things have made these leaks go away. So I called another roofing company, and he's like, "You need to talk to Ken." I'm like, who the hell is Ken? And like he whispered it just like that, like it was some kind of industry secret. And he's like, Ken is the guy that we call when we can't find the leak, because like every roofing company that came out wanted to just replace the roof. So I called Ken, and this guy shows up, and he's all of like maybe 4'5" or something, like super short, Asian guy, barely speaks any English. He's got 3 gallons of water with him, and he's got a ladder behind him, and like he was up there for like 4 hours just pouring gallons of water in random places and doing this and doing that. And like it is pouring rain today, and like he has plugged every one of our leaks. I don't have any water coming in, so I have nicknamed him Ken the Water Whisperer. He is my go-to guy anytime I have a leak. Yeah, because like leaks can be a pain in the ass. I don't. Have you guys ever had one of those in your roof?
No,
Not in our roof, but at our old house, we had a balcony off of our master bedroom, and it leaked on the outside, and it was constant. Just, you'd get rid of one problem and then it would show up somewhere else. And we had to redo the entire balcony at one point. Nightmares.
Yeah, well, water's like that, right? Because it follows gravity, so it can come in on one end of the house and kind of go down the rafters and go through here and go through here, and by the time it comes out a wall or someplace where you could see it, it could be on the complete opposite end of the place. And that's kind of what we were dealing with, because our house doesn't have an attic, so there was no way to go up in there and like look at the the actual roof and see where it was coming from. It was just this couple spots on the wall would just get a little wet when it rained too much. But Ken the Water Whisperer. So if anybody needs somebody to fix a leak, reach out by email.
I haven't had that happen, but I had a fridge line burst in my house, and my basement ceiling collapsed.
Oh.
So that was fun to deal with. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
We had our air conditioner like backed up and overflowed. The condensation overflowed down the wall and into the floor that I literally just had put in like the day before. And after months of putting it in, I had just finished it the day before.
Did
so
it
it was
buckle?
all buckled.
Yeah. Those floors can't take water. They completely come apart.
Yeah. So there was much crying and much gnashing of teeth.
Home improvement episode of Writers, Inc. So April Fool's just passed. Did anybody see any decent April Fool's jokes? Because I did not.
I failed. You
failed.
Yeah, I thought it would be funny to wear my clothes backwards all day. It was a holiday for me, so I was at home, and my husband was working from home. And I had like the stupid big pockets in the front because my pants were backwards, and I had a shirt with drawstrings in the back and a pocket on the back. and he didn't notice all day that my clothes were on backwards. So my April Fool's joke was a bust. But I did get my son. We had to go to an appointment. My son is 16. And so when we got in the car, the playlist that came on was very, very annoying kids songs that he used to listen to when he was like, 3 and 4. So it was like the Gummy Bear song and What Does the Fox Say? And he's like, what is this playlist? I'm like, oh, just pick something out. I'm like, what playlist is this? But I was like pretending I loved the songs, jamming out, singing along. He thought I'd lost my mind, but then he picked it up at the playlist and it said April 1, and he was like, oh, that's not funny. So that was my April Fool's.
I would do that to my son.
I gotta try that with my daughter, because I've got a playlist with my daughter that I created on our Amazon things back when she was like a year and a half old, and it was like all those songs. Like I need to just load that up and play it for her and see if she even remembers any of those.
Oh, they're horrible.
Yeah, I bet. Cool. Nobody else? No other April Fool's jokes?
No, I did see some interesting, like a couple of them. They were pretty obviously April Fools, though. Like some guys I follow on YouTube, for example, like one guy's he reviews comic books, and he has a history of just like hating on the Marvel comic, The Inhumans, and he did a whole episode about how it was like the greatest comic of all time, and and that went on for a while, and it was really funny to watch kind of the people popping in live, because everyone was like, this is what's wrong with you,
You just have to commit to it. That's when people believe you.
You got to commit. He got all the way through, and then in like the last 3 minutes, like, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. This is that book is swell.
I feel like April Fool's just needs to like be put on pause for a while. I don't know. I just feel like
after the past decade or so of like, we really should be paying more attention to what people are saying, being more doubtful of everything. Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of doubtful, what's in the news, Kevin?
Well, Small Press Distribution shuts down. This is coming out of Publishers Lunch. Small Press Distribution, or SPD, a key distributor of independent publishers since 1969, has ceased operations due to financial struggles worsened by declining sales and significant reduction in grant funding. SPD has transferred its inventory of 300,000 books to Ingram Content Group and Publisher Storage and Shipping, advising publishers to contact these entities regarding the future distribution of their books or to address the return or disposition of their inventory. The closure of SPD has left its clients, including all small publishers and presses, in a difficult situation with sudden notice, facing potential financial losses and the challenge of finding new distribution partners.
So are you guys familiar with this company at all?
I wasn't until I read this, and then I saw it was in the Washington Post and some other places. I guess it's a big deal. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, this is kind of like before I signed this deal with Simon & Schuster, I printed my books in bulk. So, typically you start off, you do print on demand, right? So if you need a hardcover, you do print on demand through Ingram or one of those types of companies. But the profit margin's not really there. But it gets the book out, gets it into the hands of a reader, so it still works. But once you start making a little bit of money, you start looking at, well, I could print 5,000 copies, I could print 10,000 copies. And this is one of the companies that's out there that would basically warehouse those books for you, and they would get them into the bookseller's hands. And that increases your profit margin when you can print on that level. I've heard a couple stories like this from similar companies, and I'm wondering if it's just the print on demand is getting to the point now where it's getting cost effective, and it's eating that. It's taking away that business. So I think that's what's going on here.
That feels like what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't say for sure.
Yeah, I don't know what this is going to do to some of the smaller presses. I saw there was concern about having to pay to retrieve their inventory now from this warehouses. So I don't know what that's going to do to some companies in the independent publishing system. But it just shows, you can really have some things that might hit you hard in the financial pockets that are unexpected. Yeah.
I know this has nothing at all to do with this story, but I just caught a story about here in Texas. There's a company that handles voter registration, and they save tons of like images and stuff. So like photos of like the person's driver's license and a water bill or whatever. And they serve a lot of different states, but they've started tacking on this surcharge, and because they're about to go under. And if, for some reason, that feels like it feels like the same sort of thing. Like there's all these industries now who have had kind of a lock on things for a long while, and we're starting to see them fade out. And in a lot of states, Texas included, have created their own like voter registration systems. So I think what's happening is like it's just cheaper and easier now for you to build these solutions.
Well, funny enough, that's kind of what our third article is about there. Maybe we should talk about that one because that's right on topic.
Well, let's go to the third option then. We'll loop back to number 2. So Google considers charging for AI-powered search in big change to business model. Google is contemplating introducing premium AI-powered features to its search services, marking a significant shift from its traditional ad-supported model. This approach could involve charging for enhanced search capabilities as part of its premium subscription services. Google's move comes as a response to the competitive pressures from OpenAI's ChatGPT, which could reduce users' reliance on traditional search engines and the ads displayed alongside search results. The tech giant has started experimenting with AI-enhanced search experiences, providing more detailed responses to user queries. However, these AI-generated answers require more computing resources, making them more expensive to provide them standard search results. Also, they can be crazy. I've gotten some of these results. I'm like, well, this is nuts. I don't believe this, but it's not always wrong.
What drives me crazy is I think like Google used to be really good, and like you could get really good at searches, and and it is terrible. The last year, like the results are all over the place. It's just not consistent, and I wonder if they thought that they were going to pivot to AI. And I mean, it's almost Google as a search engine is almost unusable in the way that it, used to be. Like I was trying to do a roundup of legal thrillers set in New York City. And it gave me everything except legal thrillers set in New York City.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is not a complicated search. You should be able to pull this up. Like, I should be able to get this. And I understand it's not going to be perfect and, it's going to pull up a broad range of legal thrillers. But some of the search results didn't even have anything to do with legal thrillers.
I did a search for I wanted to see the most famous self-published authors. And it gave me a list, and it was little thumbnail images along with the names, and next to names like Andy Weir, it'd have like Mark Twain's picture or something like that. So.
Well, this is going to date me a little bit, but do any of you remember like an internet before Google? Like the searches before? Okay.
Yeah.
I do.
All right, yeah, because like the discussion that like everything you guys just said are things that I remember from people discussing Yahoo and Alta Vista, Ask Jeeves. Remember Ask Jeeves?
I
That was my personal
Ask
favorite.
Jeeves,
I do remember Ask Jeeves. Ask Jeeves was fantastic, and then it just
it was
terrible.
all about marketing, I think, with a lot of them. But then Google came out of the gate with a very different type of search results, so they basically shook up the whole industry, and it feels like that's where we're at again. I don't know that Google is the answer. I don't know that ChatGPT is the answer. I think the answer is still out there, and we haven't seen it yet. And it's going to be some hybrid of AI, with what we've seen in the past. Basically giving the results that Kevin just mentioned. Because for Google to give those results, like it has to find a page, right? It has to find a story somewhere that somebody has already written that has that particular answer, and then it throws that in front of you. Where the AI version can basically create this on the fly, and we're at that weird in between middle part where they haven't actually come up with it yet. What I'm wondering though, like if somebody like I don't think I would ever pay for a search.
Right. It's
'cause
unheard of, right?
It is, and maybe it isn't. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's the whole direction all of this stuff is going. But I can see a company like Microsoft saying, well, we'll keep Bing free and we'll put AI in there, and they'll find some other way to offset that cost. So I think if Google did this, they would shoot themselves in the foot. The other alternatives are going to become apparent.
I agree.
And then you've got, Elon Musk releasing the code to his AI, to public domain, so like anybody could basically create one. So I don't know. I don't know if this is the way to go.
I don't know either. So I have a question. Have you found anything now that is better than Google that you're using for your searches?
I haven't.
No.
I've been playing with Claude quite a bit, which is one of the AIs, but it's got the same problem that that I've seen with other ones. Like it throws an answer out there and makes it feel as if that is a 100% definitive correct answer, and you research it a little bit and then realize that it's not. The nice thing about Claude is it words it a little bit better. Like its grasp of the English language is a little better than like ChatGPT and some of the other ones. But it gives you one answer, and I still prefer typing my question into Google, getting 10, 20 results, and kind of figuring my way out from there. And it's probably just a matter of retraining our brains, because once another alternative presents itself that works, I think we'll make that shift.
One thing that is happening, by the way, is the value of SEO as we know it, like it's diminishing. Like the way we think of search engine optimization is just becoming extinct, and so it's sort of there's a void there, and that's I think why AI is sort of flowing in. I mean, because it fills that void, and Google is that's their whole thing is like everyone had to follow the rules basically in order to show up on Google, and then they would actually ruin entire businesses by changing the way the search algorithm worked. So I am for one, I am okay with Google being toppled from the top spot on search. I don't trust AI completely, but I'd rather use that.
I'm okay with it. I just want something that's usable. And like for me, for what I do, my problem with most AI searches that I've done is that, I want more recent books, to include in roundups, and they just keep giving me like the same 10 classics,
Yeah.
over and over and over again. And so they are very not useful for me.
Yeah.
And if I try to ask it, to make the list more diverse, like it,
Yeah.
doesn't, and it gets very hard. And so like I am still beating my head against the wall with Google trying to come up with ever more creative search terms and using the quotes and the brackets and all the tricks that I can possibly think of to make it. I mean, I can eventually get there, but man, it used to be so much easier.
My vanity searches are getting really repetitive. And so the one good thing about ChatGPT is how it flatters me every time I ask it. So next up, looping back actually, this coming out of Publishers Marketplace, deals rebounded in the first quarter, led by strong 6-figure reports. Adult fiction sales soared, achieving a new. You did the percentages again.
I only
Christina.
did one. Or maybe I did two. I tried to keep the numbers out.
Adult fiction sales soared, achieving a new record with a 20% increase over the previous year. Adult nonfiction also saw a significant recovery. Children's book sales were down by 12%, contrasting with the gains in adult categories. Publishers' investment in 6-figure deals broke new records this quarter, both in the total number of 6-figure deals and in the scale of the largest, most major agreements. Debut titles continued their strong performance from recent years, particularly noting substantial growth in genre fiction areas such as science fiction and fantasy, romance, and horror, alongside a robust showing in literary fiction. In the realm of 6-figure deals, sci-fi and fantasy, romance, and thrillers led the pack. Yay, thrillers! Deviating from the usual patterns historically observed in publishing deal trends.
Yeah. I thought that was really interesting that sci-fi and fantasy are number one.
For once. Yeah. I mean, that's it. Sci-fi and fantasy has kind of been that redheaded stepchild in the publishing world for, I don't know, ever.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I personally am very excited about this shift in this news, considering I write a lot of science fiction and fantasy.
so you're saying is you're getting a whole lot of 6-figure deals right now.
I am.
Yeah.
I have so many I can't even keep track
Yeah.
of them right now.
Yeah.
Like they all just came in at once.
What do you think is driving this? Any idea?
I don't know. Maybe.
I think there's some escapism that people are.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking more along the lines from the business side. Like what has changed on the publishing side? Why are they all of a sudden chasing these bigger deals?
Well, I think romantasy is really sort of what's picking up with that because, romantasy has always been around, but it is really starting to show up. And I think in a way that publishers can't really ignore anymore. And so I think that because a lot of, genre fiction, like even if they don't call it a romance, it's very common to have a romance subplot. Like it just is,
Yeah.
right? Like people identify with that and they like, a hero, heroine type of dynamic. And so I think that happens a lot in science fiction and fantasy too. So I think that that's probably what's.
I mean, what would Predator be without the love romance between Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Predator?
No, but yeah, that's what I was wondering though too. Like, how do you split like sci-fi, fantasy, and romance? I mean, how do you put what in what category? Because things like Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros are just huge sellers in
Yeah.
romantasy, and I don't know where they're classifying those. So I'm suspicious they may be in sci-fi, fantasy. Yeah, even though they're very heavily romance based.
I
Yeah,
think fantasy.
yeah,
Yeah. I think that they do put them. They are. Yeah.
yeah. Awesome.
When you're writing a book, the first draft is the easy part. It's what comes after that hurts. The confusion, the self-doubt, questioning this, questioning that, trying to get feedback so you can feel confident making changes. It's a lot to handle. And that's why I'm delighted to say that this episode of the Writers Inc. podcast is sponsored by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that can make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. From start to finish, everything you need to produce a strong, confident story is at your fingertips. Get instant developmental feedback on plot, conflict, characters, themes, and more through the Story Analyzer. And edit each sentence to perfection with a complete interactive editing suite packed with reports and insights. And that's not to mention additional benefits like private community forums and live members-only support, and writing sessions every single week. It's an incredible place to be for any writer. And listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can take advantage of lifetime AutoCrit Pro membership for one single payment. That's right, no renewal fees. Head to autocrit.com/JD to get yourself a lifetime membership now. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show.
Okay, so with that, JD, who is up this week?
This week we've got Stephen James on. He's the critically acclaimed author of 18 novels, including the bestseller Bowers Files suspense series. He's also a fantastic teacher, so if you get the opportunity to attend one of his classes, you should definitely jump on that. His latest novel is called Fatal Domain, and it releases April 9th. Here he is, Stephen James.
So, Stephen, with a background in communications and a master's in storytelling, how have these experiences influenced your career in fiction writing?
Well, it's interesting because in fiction writing, there's a lot of books out there, a lot of instructors out there who will emphasize structure. They'll say, a story has a beginning, middle, end. They'll say, you need inciting incident and rising action, denouement, first act, second act, third act, all of this stuff. And so like structure is taught so often. And I believe that story trumps structure, that story is far more important than hitting something beat by beat or, starting storyline B on page 14 or whatever it might be, the template or something that you're following. So I never really understood it. Like I studied, as you mentioned, I studied storytelling years ago, and I felt like I knew what a story was. For many years, I was writing and teaching writing and storytelling. And then a couple of years ago, actually, my view of story changed, and it has impacted a lot of my writing over the last couple of years. But I think that I thought I knew what a story was, and I had partially it right, but there was a big aspect of it that I was actually missing. And so when I mentioned all of those sort of structural ways of looking at story, all of those are really based on, Aristotle when he wrote Poetics many years ago.
Mhm.
He mentioned some of these things. And so ever since then, people have been looking at story through a temporal lens, beginning, middle, and first act, second act, third act. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that, except that I don't love it because it gives you the impression that a story is about a progression of events instead of a collision of desires. See, stories are more about collisions of desires than just events occurring. So you can have three events and have no story. If you have no struggle, you have no desire. So I tried to take a step back and say it at more of an elemental level. What is going on in a story? Like what actually is, a story. And so anyway, I came up with what I believe are four elements for every story, but then two additional ones for every great story. So it kind of forms a cube of six sides. So we can chat about that if you want, or we can go on. I just love talking
I
about
would love
stories, so I
to.
geek out on this, and I was like, I'll just go on. So anyway, so like I'll just mention them really quick. Like I do a whole day long seminar on StoryCube, but we'll
Mhm.
fly through it and we'll try to do it in the condensed version. But basically, obviously, the first thing you need is a character. So I know you're probably thinking, literally, Steve, that took you 25 years to come up with that you need a character for stories. Like, but it's true. Obviously, we do need a character, and there's different aspects
Mhm.
of characterizations we can talk about. But the second thing, obviously, is setting as well, and that's geo temporal. So settings are always in time and space, obviously, and so again, that took you that long to come up with. But I feel like those are important aspects of story. And the third thing a lot of people would say the story needs is plot, but I don't think that's the case. I feel like the third thing a story needs is struggle. Like if nothing goes wrong, you have no story. You have perhaps a premise or
Mhm.
possibility for a story, but without that tension, the collision of desires, the struggle, the story never gets started. So you have a character and a setting, you have struggle, and then the fourth thing that every story has, you can't have a story without these four, I don't believe, is pursuit. So your character is going to pursue whatever they desire. They'll face those setbacks. They'll make choices that matter. And that'll propel them through the story. And so in my perspective, if you don't have a character or a setting, if you don't have a struggle or you don't have pursuit, you don't have a story. You can have a report. Um, someone woke up and they went downstairs. Let's say Jane woke up, went downstairs, had a cup of coffee, started working on her novel, and then went out for a run. Okay, three acts. Is it a story? No, it's a report. It's not a story. So that's helped me to actually identify areas in the stories I'm writing that might need work. Like I might need to work on the struggle or the pursuit or whatever. So anyway, the two additional aspects of story that I feel like all great stories have is okay. So the fifth thing is what I call a pivot.
Mhm.
So a pivot is you could say twist, but I don't necessarily. I think a twist is a type of a pivot. There are other types, but it's a moment where something happens that's unexpected and also inevitable both. And if it's basically in every scene, you have three choices. Everything can be predictable because everything happens like causally related to what precedes it. So you're like, okay, I know where this is going and it goes there. You don't want to do that. Or it can be outlandish where nothing happens that makes any sense. And you've probably read books or seen movies that do
Mhm.
that. You're just like, what is going on? This makes no sense. So you don't want to do that either. You don't want to be boring and you don't want to be outlandish. The only other choice is to have a pivot where you have a moment that's unexpected. We don't see it coming, but it is also logical, inevitable. It follows and flows from what precedes it. And so I believe that every scene should have a pivot. Every story should have a pivot. And the last thing is payoff. And that's really, does it work? It's like, if it's funny, do I laugh? If it's scary, am I tense? If it's heartwarming, do I cry? Whatever. So it's kind of the interweaving of all of the pieces because you can have a clever pivot, but maybe it doesn't really impact anyone. So like, okay, whatever. Then it's not still what we need it to be. So it's looking at all of those six aspects of story, and that's a long answer to your short question. But all of the sort of background for me in studying story led me to realize that I was missing something about story. mainly and namely pursuit, pivot, and payoff. Those three aspects that I hadn't really realized were so essential to stories before then.
Yeah. And you not only have a large collection in nonfiction, but a large collection in fiction as well. So you really become sort of your own student, I would presume, when you go to writing. And so, especially when it comes to this latest novel, how did you take all of this philosophy and sit down to the page? And were there any aspects of it during this novel that you had to, yell at yourself as a student or kind of really hone in and focus in on or shift about?
No, it's interesting. So this newest book's called Fatal Domain, and so as I was writing it, I was actually I don't plot out my books. Like I don't
Okay.
outline anything. I don't do any of that business. So I write organically. And so like as I was writing, I was truly organic. I had a premise for the book. And I kind of knew what the characters were because it was following from a previous story, Broker of Lies. And so kind of had an idea of some of the characters and so on. But as I was writing, I was every scene I was asking myself, how can I write myself into a corner so that I can pivot myself out of the corner in a way people don't expect. So I was always trying to write toward a pivot. So it was a different approach than, I'd had in the past. I'd always written organically, but I'd never been so purposive about saying I want to write toward pivots. And so hopefully there are a number of surprises and plot turns and so on in the story that people will appreciate. But it is a different, sort of approach. What does the character want? They pursue it. How can it go into a place we don't expect but do appreciate and pivot forward and propel it into the next scene?
Yeah. So you mentioned pivots here, and I think
Yeah.
in The Art of the Tale is really where you talk about that importance of pivoting in storytelling.
Yeah.
So either in this novel or in a different work, what's been like your most memorable pivot that you've made?
Oh my gosh. Oh man. Well, that's a good question. So one that actually just jumps to mind is a book I wrote called The Queen, and there's this sort of enigmatic figure in The Queen, and so I didn't know who it was. Valkyrie was the code name for this character, and so as I was writing, I mean the book is about almost 140,000 words, so it's a pretty substantial novel. I mean it's like 600-page stories. So as I was writing it, I still didn't know who Valkyrie really was, like the mastermind behind everything,
Hmm.
until about 2 weeks before it was due. So I worked on it for about 18 months. And then I finally was like, I don't know who this is. And all of a sudden I thought, wait, I think if it's this one person, that would be amazing. And so I had to go back and sort of add a couple of foreshadows, just a couple of little changes and so on, earlier in the story, but who it ends up being on the last page when you find the final reveal of what happens with Valkyrie and you realize who Valkyrie is. That was a total surprise to me when I wrote the book. Like I had no idea that character would be the mastermind at all. So I love that though. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
imagine like sitting down. I've never started a book where I know how it will end. I can't imagine how boring that would be to actually say like, oh, I'm going to spend the next year of my life writing my way toward what I already know. I'm like, it would drive me insane. So it's a so it's super fun for me to find moments of discovery as I write the stories and hopefully readers will be surprised as well because some people will say like how did you come up with that twist or whatever, and I'm like, well, I had no idea when I wrote the book. It's like I didn't know until like 2 weeks before it was due. Like I had no idea what that would happen. So anyway, if I can't predict it, hopefully a lot of readers won't, and there'll be surprises and pivots and twists along the way.
Yeah, and that sounds a lot like what you'd mentioned before with this aspect of organic storytelling. And if
Mm.
I'm not mistaken, you did like a seminar or a class on this during Thriller Fest. Is that correct?
Yeah, I usually teach each year up at Thriller Fest up in New York City. It's a conference for thriller, suspense, mystery writers, and so on. And so I do teach up there usually every year. Yeah.
And so what sort of insights when you go to teach aspiring writers, like what sort of insights do you gain from them during these sorts of seminars?
Well, I always enjoy sort of when people push back about an idea. Like that's really how I came up with the idea of, well, Story Cube or Story Trump Structure, a book I wrote on organic writing, is because people would give me this advice. They'd be like, you should do this. You have to plot out your story or outline or whatever it might be. And I would say, I don't know why. Why do I have to do that? And plus, does it even work for me? And so when I'm teaching, I love it when people will sort of prod me and say, "Oh, can you really not have a story without, pursuit or something?" And then we explore it. And so I like that challenge of trying to come up with ways to really help people and get them to think on their own. Like literally, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't think I'm wrong, but I might be. It's like,
Yeah.
and I've been for 2 years trying to find examples, counter examples of where you don't have these aspects of story elements to a story. But in any case, I want people to think and process and so I always enjoy whenever people sort of bring up questions to me, not necessarily attack or challenge everything but bring up questions. You're like, that is actually a good question. I hadn't thought of that. Let's explore it
Yeah.
and see where it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be learned from healthy debate, I think. And I think that's where you're getting at. Um, with moving to Fatal Domain, uh, this is a sequel. It's a sequel to Broker of Lies. I'm curious, how did you approach writing a sequel, coming back into these characters and building a story off of what was already there?
Over the years, I've done a number of series. I did an 11 book series with Patrick Bowers is the main character of that series. And so I was kind of used to the idea of building up characters and then introducing them and then developing them as story progresses. And so you like at the end of Broker of Lies, I really introduced a lot of sort of mystery and intrigue and so I knew a lot of things that I had to address in Fatal Domain. Because when I was writing Broker of Lies, I just kept throwing more mysteries and sort of teasers in there. I'm like, oh yeah, and this bad guy or whatever. I just all of a sudden I was like, okay. Then I sat down to write Failed Domain. I was like, crap, what have I done? Like I've got 9 literally bad guys. I've got to somehow deal with all of these villains or whatever. And so that was an interesting challenge. But I actually like the process of getting to know a character over the course of more than one book. Because you can get to know them a little bit in one book, but as you eventually really flesh them out, I feel like they take on more, I don't know, not humanity, but a deeper characterization for me. So
Yeah.
I enjoy that process. It's good.
Yeah. And the research process behind this, I mean, you have a lot of technological and espionage elements behind it. What kind of approach do you take when balancing this sort of deep information and maintaining that narrative flow?
Well, I really have with this series, I really did try to be pretty much as accurate as I could. Obviously, it deals with the Department of Defense and the Pentagon, and I can't reveal everything, but I do try to be authentic. So the people who are maybe in the Department of Defense or work at the Pentagon or who work in the different agencies that I mentioned in the book would read it and be like, okay, I mean, obviously it's fictional, but I buy it. That's huge to me. And that is so much research, though. It's a lot of time to get it to that place. And so it took me about a year or so of research to write the 2 books, I would say. And um, so I feel like it's a way of respecting your readers, actually, is doing the research. And to get to your question is like, how do you not get bogged down maybe with research? To me, um, there's there's tons of research you're never going to use in the book.
Hmm.
You don't know that when you start, like you're researching, right? And you're writing a story. But to me, I always lean into the story instead of the research. So you'll be tempted if you've researched something to find a way to stick it into the book, right? You'll be tempted. And this is one of the reasons I don't outline is people who outline are tempted because they've spent all the time outlining to stick the stuff in the book, even if it doesn't really belong there. And so I was leading the story. So at the end, I've got piles, reams and reams of research that I just wasn't able to use. And it's tempting. I mean, it is tempting. If you kind of find something interesting, you're like, God, I want to use this somehow. Maybe it doesn't fit, so you gotta shave it out. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's super entertaining, maybe you can include a paragraph or two about it, um, but at a certain point, you just gotta say, you know what? This I'll have to hang on to this for another future project.
Yeah. And you said that was about a year of research. Is that what does the year of research entail? Is there any sort of like interesting moment in there that you can divulge?
Yeah, I mean, it was so I was working on Broker of Lies, and one of well, actually, the climax kind of happens down in Tennessee, a place called Y12. It's Department of Energy, not secret. I mean, we know it's there now. It was secret. It was where they developed one of the bombs with the Manhattan Project to end the
Mhm.
war. And so anyway, I had gotten permission to go and do a little bit of research. And so I was like, oh, probably I'm gonna go back and research this. So I drove up to the gate, and the guy's like, who are you? And I was like, oh, I'm an author. I'm doing research on this book. And he's like, what? And he's got like these two guys with like huge guns or whatever. And so he's like, show me your driver's license or whatever. I pull it out. I hand it across, and he like goes to the back and takes a photograph of the license plate, right? And then
Mhm.
he's like, photographs for my driver's license because he's like, you're not getting in here, and you wanted to know who I was and put me on some list. And he's like, I'm gonna take your photo. And so I'm sitting there in the car, like, do you smile or not? Like,
Yep.
this is the most awkward photo I've ever been in because I'm like, you're sticking me on like some terrorist watch list or something. All I want to do is write my novel, and so I'm sitting there like, I don't know if should I spot. Oh, it's just awkward. So I pulled forward and turned around and left. So that day I was not able to get into actually Y12, but I remember that was an interesting research day right there. Um, but I was able to tour the Pentagon twice, and then like I said, do a little research at Y12 and some other locations but again, I try to be as authentic as I possibly can with the story without giving anything away that would be like a
Yeah.
national security secret or anything like that. So, so to me, the authenticity and believability are super huge for this type of story. Um, so the characters, I mean, in a sense, in a spy espionage story, characters are bigger than life in a certain sense. They're doing things that might be extraordinary for many people. So the main character, Travis Brock, in these stories is not an extraordinarily gifted spy in this sense. He's almost brought out of his where he's comfortable, the realm of where he's comfortable, right? Because he's more of an analyst, but he's courageous and he has and that kind of comes out as he's under pressure, but he's a very relatable guy. So he's the very relatable main character. He has this almost photographic memory where that's sort of his superpower, I guess. Like he's got this eidetic memory. But other than that, he's not like a really kick-ass kind of spy
Right.
guy or whatever. But he partners up with a couple of people that do have more of those skills. And so sort of a unique, it's more of a I guess it's kind of more of an intellectual look at the spy game through his eyes, and then there's the action that kind of results from the people he's encountering as he goes along the way. Makes me think of a little bit of like Clancy's early Jack Ryan stories, like where he was an analyst. He's very intelligent, we get that, but then his courage comes out when he's facing sort of these bigger than life issues. And I think that's similar a little bit to Travis's journey.
Yeah. Um, Now I can only imagine that you have a picture at Y12 just there printed so that
I
if you
know,
ever return.
I know, it's so pathetic. I was just like, uh,
Oh,
why
that's
are you
amazing.
smiling? Like, what is doing? It's like, anyway,
Uh, So Fatal Domain also explores themes like forgiveness and morality. How do you approach those sorts of themes when you go to write story?
No, it's a good question. I actually, when I write, I don't start with a message I'm trying to get across, or even necessarily a theme I'm trying to explore, as much as a dilemma or a question. So, really in this book, the question is like, how do you forgive someone who's done the unforgivable, or something along those lines? And so it's like, I didn't know the answer when I started, and the book is not meant to necessarily provide an answer, but instead to provide an opportunity for readers to look through the character's eyes at that question. And so we actually have to do that. And he gets to a moment where you wonder, really, will he, I guess we'll say, will he take vengeance? Well, yeah, he has an opportunity to forgive or to kill someone. And you really, I think, get to a certain point, you're like, I don't know quite what he's going to do. And I like that. That's what I want.
Hmm.
Because it's not there to try to beat a message into people. I just want people to think about some of these questions. They're important questions. And so I feel like stories that explore deep questions are usually more meaningful stories.
Yeah.
So I start with the question and a dilemma instead of an answer or a theme when I write.
I love that. That's a
Yeah.
fun approach to storytelling.
Yeah.
Um, so you've also emphasized taking risks to grow as a writer. I would be curious if you can tell me maybe a specific risk that you took either with this book or just in your broader author career, and how did that go?
Well, I did. I mentioned I did 11 books with Patrick Bowers, and they were very. I loved the stories. I loved the characters. They were popular, and I guess sold about 1 million copies. So this is like it was a pretty successful series, right? But then at toward the end, I was like, "There's other stories I want to sell or tell." Like there was a story that I wanted to tell, which is a science fiction story. And then I wanted to do this spy espionage story. There's a young adult sort of horror sort of story that I wanted to do. And so I just said, you know what? I'm just going to have to set Patrick Bowers aside, which was hard because I'd really lived with him for 12 years. He was basically day in and day out, I was writing his stories, 11 books. Anyway, so I did that. And that's a risk because I kind of could have kept doing his stories.
Hmm.
People still want more of them and still want them. And it's not that I don't want to do anymore. It's just that I've had to try some other things. And I feel like I could have easily just gone the route that some authors do, where they find a character who's comfortable for them, and that's all they write for the rest of their lives. 20, 30, whatever. And that's okay. That's fine for them. That's just not right for me. And so I knew I needed to, if I was going to grow as a storyteller, as a writer, try something else. So I wrote Synapse, which is a sci-fi thriller, and then Broker of Lies and Fatal Domain, the espionage books, and now I'm starting the young adult series called Rift, that will be sort of folk horror. So I would love to get back to Bowers, and I think someday I might be able to do that. Um, but it was very, was it financially smart? I don't know. But it's like I get that, but it's like you have to make a choice of what you're going to do if you're a creative, person. And I have a friend who's a super successful writer. Everyone would know his name if I mentioned his name. He's sold 30 million books. And and I saw him recently, and he said, "Yeah, he's like, I have to do this next book in the series with his main character, right?" He's like, "I have to do this." And I was thinking, why? Like you've written, you've sold 30 million books. You have
Hmm.
good income from this and all of the different products and so on. And but he felt trapped that he had to write but he had other ideas he wanted to do, but he's like, "I have to write this." And so I was like, I understand, and I don't disrespect him for his choice to go that route or whatever, but for me, I wouldn't be able to do that. I would have to say, I need to I need to step out and try something. And maybe I'll fall on my face, but I feel
Yeah.
like you do have to try to continue to risk if you're going to grow, as a creative person. So, when we start, we'd risk. When we
Hmm.
first send out a book proposal or a query letter or whatever, they're sort of stepping out there. And then some people get to the place where they're sort of safe and then they stop risking. For me, I needed to kind of just keep doing something a little different each time.
Yeah. I think I'm in the same boat as you. I like comfort for such a short period of time, and then I'm like, okay, next. Um, but you've also mentioned that you've struggled with self-doubt before, and how I'm curious how you navigate that challenge when that arises. What do you do?
Self-doubt's an interesting thing. I was interviewing, I have a podcast called The Story Blender. And so I interviewed Sandra Brown and I talked to her about self-doubt. She said, yeah, sometimes I write a book and I just think I'm never going to be able to finish it. And then I look at my shelf and I see I've written 65 New York Times bestsellers and I think, okay, I can finish my book. And I interviewed Dean Koontz and I was like, do you ever deal? He's like, oh man, every book, no one's going to like my book. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish. I'm like, this is Dean Koontz. Like, are you even kidding me? You know, so I think all authors to a certain degree probably deal with this in certain ways where we say we believe in our story. But we don't know if other people are going to love it. We don't always know. Like we think they will, we hope they will, but you believe in it and you write it and you're just like, you get to the end of spending a year in your basement or 10 years, as some people have written, stories or whatever, however long it takes you, and you emerge and you hit send and you think, okay, now what?
Hmm.
Is anyone gonna read my book? Are they gonna like my book? So it's just part of the gig, I think. And as far as overcoming it, I think you just have to continue to enjoy the journey. Like if writing it just becomes a drudgery, because I don't know, because you're worried, let's say, so much. Because the worry of what people will say or think or how that'll respond to it, if it'll sell, if you'll get an agent or edit, all of those things kind of, I think, can chip away at the joy. And so if you ever get to that place, then probably take a break and step away for a while and regroup. But if it continues to feed you and give you joy, then to me that is probably the best counter to the worry and self-doubt, is just finding joy in the moments of writing creativity.
Yeah. So you've given us a ton of advice. I think that this whole thing could have a ton of notes, but I'm curious, as like a final question, do you have some type of quintessential piece of advice that you would give new and aspiring authors that you'd like to share?
Burn your outline and follow the story.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I
You're
appreciate you for
welcome.
coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, interesting stuff. Story trumps structure. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I have a lot to say about that actually, because I don't really know that he made a compelling argument. I think he just repackaged structure and plot and just worded it differently. But if you boil down what he's saying, it's essentially structure and plot.
But he threw the word Trump in there, and that made it controversial.
It did, yeah. I mean, which is fine. Listen, like people, everyone has a different process, I think, and they learn differently. And, maybe repackaging it helps sort of unlock those creative flows in some writers. Who's to say? You never know what's going to resonate with who.
What I think has happened, there's two things happening here. Stephen
And-
teaches a lot of classes, so I think like he's able to create these boxes and kind of check or tick them off. But story trump structure, I think that's been around from the get-go, because I know a lot of authors out there that have never read any books on craft, couldn't tell you what a 3-act structure is, but they sit down and they write a fantastic novel because it's got a beginning, middle, and an end, and it just kind of flows the right way.
Right.
You could then take that novel and you could,
Yeah.
take Save the Cat or one of those structures, and you could probably put it into that model. The author didn't realize that they were following that model at the time when they wrote it. Same thing with the 3-act structure. Like most books do have that. You may not realize it when you're writing it or when you're reading it, but it's there. I think he's kind of just pointing that out.
So the reason I think that structure became such a regulator of writing is because of film. Because in Hollywood in particular, you turn over a script, and if it doesn't fit the Save the Cat structure, it's just thrown out immediately. Like if on page 17 you don't have this inciting incident or whatever it is, I don't even know those structures that well, but they stick to that. They adhere to that pretty strictly.
Yeah. And I agree with Jenna. I think it's just kind of, I've read a lot of craft books. When I started, I read probably too many craft books. And I eventually got to the point where I said, oh, they're all saying pretty much the same thing. Most of them do. And it's that you have to have conflict. You have to have conflict. You have to have a character who wants something. They can't get it repeatedly because conflict and obstacles. And then you have an ending that is surprising but inevitable. I mean, Robert McKee says it. Sean Coyne says it. I can think of many, many others. But yeah, that's essential to story.
See, I read a whole lot of craft boxes while I was writing.
I love craft dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
craft dinner.
That's also very important. Yeah. And I think sometimes, like I said, you hear something and, anyone that's ever tried to teach a child something, sometimes it's like the most surprising explanation is the one that sticks. So, and I think that's why there are so many different takes on craft. Because you never know what's going to stick to someone and what's going to turn that light bulb on.
Yeah. What did you think about writing towards a pivot? Is that something that you do?
Well, isn't that, I guess that when I'm thinking of beat sheets, that is sort of every scene should have, a resolution in some way, take you away from the goal or towards the goal, which I kind of feel would be a pivot.
Yeah, isn't that just plot points? Isn't that just the same
Yeah.
idea? Yeah.
I think so. That's because I was trying to think you can't, necessarily pivot, go a completely different direction. I suppose you could, but you can only do that so many times in a novel, right? Before a reader is just I can't do this anymore.
I do it all the time. I basically paint myself into a corner. So the scene that I wrote this morning, it had to be there, but I wanted to end it in a particular way. So my lead character sees a symbol on the wall, which is kind of a callback to an earlier book. And it's a huge aha moment for readers. For me as the writer, I've got no clue where I'm going to go with it next because it's not something he should have seen. And I think that the fact that I don't know where it needs to go, it's such a drastic, pivot point that, it jumps out at the reader. And I do that kind of thing all the time. I think it's important. When you're writing thrillers anyway, it all depends on the type of book you're writing, but you basically need to end each chapter with more of a question than an answer. One of the things that I got just working with Patterson all the time is we would go through a chapter and a lot of times we would delete the last sentence or delete the last paragraph. So you write the whole scene out, but then you take that one thing out and it just creates just more of a page turning moment where you have to go on to the next chapter to figure out what happens. So yeah, you just leave them, you don't answer anything till the end.
Yeah. I'll put myself in a corner like that, and sometimes it'll spark an immediate thing sometimes, and then a lot of times I'll come back the next day and take that whatever the immediate solution was out and rewrite it again, because what happens is I tend to go towards almost Deus Ex Machina kind of, suddenly he developed these new skills that I never set up. But instead, I like things to fall apart in favor of the action. Kotler's in the middle of the soup and there's no way out and, whatever. And so, I like that sort of, I don't know, I forget what you call that, but the idea that it's doom and gloom. And then a sudden light.
Dark night of the soul.
Well,
yeah.
I'll give you an example. So in Coast to Coast Murders, the first book that I wrote with Patterson, there's a scene near the very beginning, and it's something we've seen in every TV show, every cop movie. Our lead character has been accused of something. He's in the police interrogation room. His attorney is sitting down there next to him, and like the scene needed to be in the book because we have to communicate certain facts. So I wrote the scene the way that I thought it needed to be. I sent it over to Jim. He sent it back like 10 minutes later, and he had changed the ending. So at the end of this scene, the attorney for our client, our good guy, stands up. He knocks on the door to basically be let out of this interrogation room. And when the cops open the door to let him out, he grabs the cop by the collar, bashes his head against the wall and kills him, then turns to his client and says, "All right, let's go." And like that's how Patterson sent the scene back to me, and he's like, "All right, now you need to write what comes next." So it took it in a completely different direction. So then I painted him in a corner. He painted me in a corner, but like by getting that kind of rhythm, it created an intensely twisty book, which was a lot more fun to read and write.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just had a character kill someone that I did not in any way intend to kill. Like they were supposed to be pivotal to the story. And so now I'm like, well, what the hell do I do now? And that's led to all kinds of interesting new choices.
I just did that too, but I had temporarily put in a name of a family member who I actually like, and then I killed them. So I'm like, oh, I have to change this name now because I didn't mean to kill you.
Oh, that's funny. I kill my brother in almost every story.
Yeah.
Your brother's the Kenny of your fiction.
Well,
I was going to curse there.
When I first started, he was always like, how come I'm not in this? How come I'm not in this? So now I've just started putting a Jeffrey in there, and he gets really excited, and then I show him the part where he dies, and he's like, come on.
The most response I ever got to a survey or whatever was people responding wanting me to kill them off in a novel. That was like overwhelmingly people wanted that.
It is fun.
Maybe I'll leave
I
it.
think
We'll
who was it? Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman did that in their Illuminae series because if you've read that series, it's got like all these thing like graphics in it, and so they always have this giant death list at some point in all three of the books, and so you could submit your name and they picked at random, and so there's a bunch of just fan names on their death list in their books.
That's fun. Oh, okay. I have to ask, have you ever done something or had something happen that you think got you on the government watch list? You don't have to complain.
Should I
Kevin's
even
on a list of people that are on too many lists. Like he's.
I am on multiple lists. I'm going to just tell you that straight.
My dad ended up on the no-fly list for years, which was hilarious because if you know my dad, he is, like such a rule follower. Of all the people in my family, like my dad, my poor dad, we just run him through the ringer. Like, he's an accountant. He follows the rules, and he's just surrounded by all of us who are just like, they're guidelines, right? And so the fact that of all of us, he ended up on the no-fly list. And at the time, he had to fly almost every month for work. And so he had to go to the airport like 6 hours early and get taken into an interrogation room and prove that he wasn't the person who's on the list. And it was this whole
okay.
thing.
So it wasn't actually him on the list. It was somebody with the same name or something.
It was his name, but he got treated as if he were on the no-fly list. I thought you were going to tell us he tried to open the plane door or something while you were in the air or something. Took his shoes off on the airplane, something weird. Anyway, so I think it's hilarious.
Well, what's the coolest place you guys have ever gone for research for a book?
Oh, that's a good question.
The dregs of the internet? No, I don't know.
I've done some weird stuff, but like none of it's actually ended up in a book. Like I've been on an aircraft carrier. I used to deliver pizzas when I was 18 back in Fort Lauderdale, and there was a naval base right off 17th Street. This was before 9/11. So like when I delivered a pizza out there, nobody wanted to pay for it. Like they'd wave you through the gate. I'd climb around on the submarine. I'd have to find the sailor who actually ordered it. No security whatsoever. So like I was climbing through all these, these naval ships. I spent the night in a prison in Belle Glade, Florida. It was an abandoned abandoned prison, and we were filming a TV show that was supposed to be like a haunted prison thing that never got picked up by anybody. That was probably one of the cooler places I've ever been. But none of these things have been in a book.
All right, that trumps me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that trumps me. I went. I'm not going to say which university, but I went to a university and found, or I had heard that there was an underground tunnel system below it. So a friend and I went into that and spent a night in there, not on purpose. So.
Oh, all right. That's a good way.
I don't know.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's a good way to go. I got nothing. Did you have something, Jenna?
No.
You guys got to get out more.
No.
Not yet.
Yeah. We're going to go do something weird. I had a friend who was, acquaintance who was a ghost hunter and had all the equipment and was supposed to take me to a asylum, but it never happened. I'm still kind of bummed about that. So
Yeah, come to Vegas.
an old one that had been kind of abandoned, and yeah.
Come to Vegas, Christina. We'll go do something weird.
Well, you're close to Detroit, right? There's a lot of those kind of cool places in Detroit. Like if you want to.
Yeah. It was a Detroit asylum. Yeah, we were gonna go, but yeah.
When you come to Reno, I'll take you up to Virginia City. They got a haunted school and a haunted graveyard and all kinds of things. We'll be adventurous.
All right, that'll be fun. All right, that sounds great. Okay, JD, who is up next week?
Next week, we've got Anthony Horowitz coming back. He's the New York Times bestselling author of numerous novels, including several in the James Bond franchise. His latest is called Close to Death. It's the 5th title in his Hawthorne and Horowitz series, and it releases April 16th.
Yeah, and it's a great, really interesting narrative, so I can't wait to talk about that. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode, and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.